Good morning, everyone. So today we are starting with Rsk4803. We are going to start off with Learning Unit 1. But before we look at Learning Unit 1, we're going to do a bit of housekeeping. And the first thing that I'm going to address is for those students who have not yet registered, we gave out access to a lot of students. And for those students who have not yet registered, please note that you also, if you contact me directly on the WhatsApp number, we will ask you to create a user account on our website. And on that user account, when we create that user account and we give you access, remember, we have to give you access temporarily as well, right? For those who are on the trial package as well. So we're going to give you access temporarily. And on that access, you're going to be able to access some of our past videos. I think it's past videos studying, some going through Start Unit 1, maybe Start Unit 2 somewhere there. And then we're also going to give you access to our articles so that you are able to download the articles as you prepare for the coming class as well, because the next coming class, which is going to be end of March, we are also going to make it open to all the students as well, given that your registration is ending end of March as well. So we're going to give you access so that you can see exactly how we conduct our classes. And if it works for you, then you can also register as well. So please note that for those students who have not yet been registered, we can give you temporary access until end of March, where you are able to access the past videos going through the study units, as well as the material that you need to go through when we go through the study units as well. Because remember, for Rsk4803, there is no textbook for it. So you need to go through articles. So once we give you access to our website, you are going to be able to access some of our articles. So you should be able to access some of our articles, which you are now going to be able to use so that in the next coming class, when we go through this article, you will be having that article in front of you as well, so that you know exactly what we are covering and where we are going with the articles as well. So please note that for Rsk4803, your curriculum is based on articles, and the articles that we are having are already highlighted with a bit of notes on them, and they're highlighted based on what? Learning outcomes. Because usually when the lecturer prepares the questions for the exam, they look at the learning outcomes and then they prepare the questions based on the learning outcomes as well. Now, please note that I'm not going to go through the orientation with you because there's already a video where we do orientation, right? Now, on that orientation video, which is already available, we show you how to access the website so that you know exactly when you log into the website, where do you go to access what material. We show you how to access that our website on that orientation video so that you're able to access the articles, so that you're able to access the videos from the previous period, as well as when we go through revision, how to access the revision material. And remember, for revision material, that's going to be past question papers, answers to the past question papers, past assignments, lecturers' answers to the past assignments, as well as some videos going through those that material as well. We do have the videos available, but we usually utilize them now during the revision period as well. So please note that once you register with us, we go through the curriculum with you. We assist you with the assignments so that we guide you going on how to go through the assignments as well. Even if it's an individual assignment where they ask you customized questions, we also have a class as a whole, and then I also individually ask you to make sure that you're in the right direction in answering the assignments. So please take note of that. And then during November period, December, January, and February, when we go through revision, we are going to go through the revision period with you and also assist you as well. So please make sure that you take note of that. So on our side is that's basically how we offer the curriculum, and those are the main things that you need to take note of for now. Are there any questions before we start looking into the curriculum? Any questions? All right. So to register, what I'll do is please send me a WhatsApp message directly. Please send me a WhatsApp message directly so that I send you the registration form. So just send me a WhatsApp message, then I'll send you the registration form so that you are able to register as well. All right. So please note that our next class. Yes, yes.
I'm sorry, I can't see where I'm raising my hand, but I just wanted to quickly ask you. I hear you saying that there are no textbooks, but articles. So those articles,
Mhm.
are they, apart from you sharing them with us for us to go through them, are they available somewhere on the UNISA thingy, on under my modules? Because I can't see anything except assessment information.
I think they will be available under, there's a library link that you need to utilize to access the
Oh,
articles. There's a library link.
okay.
Yeah, there is a library link, but we already have them. So I can't remember exactly which link it is,
Okay,
but there
that's
is a
fine.
link for you to be able to access the e-library at my UNISA. And in the e-library, that's where you're able to access the articles. But remember, the articles that we already have now, they're already updated, which
Okay.
they're already highlighted with a bit of notes on them as well. So the ones that you get on my UNISA e-library, they are usually blank without any notes on them as well. So just
Oh,
keep that in mind.
thanks.
All right. So also for those who are on the trial package, please note that our next class is going to be on the 28th, and we are going to make it available to everyone so that people have access to see exactly how we conduct the classes as well. But preferably, when we go through the curriculum, you benefit a lot more if you make sure that you download all your articles and have them ready in the folders, so that whatever article we're going to be going through in the next class, you already know exactly exactly where the article is, so that when we go through the article with you, you're already familiarizing yourself with the article as well. That's number one. For those who feel like they understand better when they ask questions in the class, I would advise you to go through the video, because remember, before every class, we have videos available that we recorded in the previous year. So we make those videos available to you so that you can actually go through, like for example, when you go through study unit one, there's already videos that we've already recorded. We're going through study unit one. So you can actually go through the video, go through the article like you're in class, because remember the video setup is exactly like this, although it's just recorded, but it's exactly the same setup as this one as well. So that when you now attend class, you see that you benefit a lot more when you now highlight things that you didn't understand or concepts that you didn't understand. Then feel free to ask questions. You understand better when you ask as many questions as possible. And there's no such thing as a stupid question. Every question is valid. So please don't hesitate to ask those questions. Because remember, the moment you ask a question, it means you are already straightening straightening up the way you are actually understanding a particular concept as well, so that if there's anything that you have doubts on, you are clearing that doubt as well. You see that by the time we get to revision, you will no longer need to go back to the study units if you do that, because when you go into revision, you're going to jump straight into revision without having to now catch up and going back to certain study units as well. Because remember, if you look at these study units, there's a certain sequence that they also follow as well. And please note that in the orientation video that I've stated, that I also make available to students, I always give them a link to that YouTube video as well. We go through this, we show you how to go to the website. Over and above that, we also give you a rundown of the curriculum. So we tell you exactly how is the curriculum built from study unit 1 all the way through to study unit 23. So you'll see that there is a link and there is a sequence that the lecturer has followed in actually building up your curriculum. So there's a link and a sequence as well. So, which means because of this, I would strongly advise that you go through that orientation video, because I give you a proper in-depth analysis of your curriculum, so that when you are now going to go through your curriculum, you already know exactly why are you doing what you are doing. And even on that rundown as well, I also emphasize the common concepts or study units that the lecturer loves to bring in the exam. I also highlight them as well. So please make sure that you go through that orientation video. If you don't have it, please let me know so that I can send you the link to that orientation video. So our agenda today is to jump straight into study unit 1. Our aim is to go through study unit 1 all the way to 1.1 all the way through to 1.5. Then in the next class, we're going to go through study unit 1.6, which looks at the VUCA acronym, because we need to make sure that the VUCA acronym, I see that the lecturer loves to bring study unit 1.6 in the exam as well, quite a lot in short questions currently. If you look at the sequence of the questions, the way they've been asked in 2025, jumping on to 2026 as well, you will see that the lecturer is loving to bring the concept of VUCA as part of the short questions in question number 1 of the exam, because some students end up confusing these letters of the acronym, or exactly what they stand for and what are they, why are they there in that acronym as well. So we're going to go through that as well in a bit more in depth when we go through study unit 1.6. So now, looking at study unit 1, you see that study unit 1 is part of topic 1. Now, when you look at the topics that are covered for your curriculum, there are 6 topics that your curriculum covers. So there are 6 topics that your curriculum covers. 6 topics. Now, so topic number 1 is the one where we are going to be looking at risk management in general. So it's basically an introduction to risk management in general. Then from there, by the time we get to unit 3, we are now being introduced to capital in enterprises, where we are now going to say, so from the capital of the enterprise, remember you say your capital of the enterprise is your assets is equal to equity plus liabilities, right? So which means when you now look at the capital of the enterprise, how do we now do an in-depth analysis of the risk financing component? So it's a financing of the business, but you're financing it to manage the risk exposures of the business as well. So that's basically what we're going to be looking at. So you see that your modules Rsk4801, 02, 03, 04, 05. There are different components of risks which you are looking at in more in depth. But from Rsk4803 perspective, we are now looking at a risk financing perspective to say, from the capital of the enterprise, how do we now analyze the financing side from a risk management perspective, and why do we need to do what we do as well? So because of this, everything that you're going to be doing from study unit 1 all the way through study unit 23 is basically linked to the question on risk financing as well. So if you check in your study guide, so if you check in your study guide, you'll see that topic 1 of the 6 topics looks at introducing us to risk management, and it's made up of study unit 1, study unit 2, and study unit 3. Study unit 1 looks at lessons not learned, and when you look at the lessons not learned, you see that we are given case studies where risk management failed. So we're given historical case studies where risk management failed. Then, so they give us the case studies where risk management failed. So you need to go through those case studies so that you can see exactly. So when can we say risk management? How do we now identify that risk management is failed in that case? So I'm going to show you exactly how to maneuver study unit 1. Then study unit 2, we look at the enterprise risk management, where we are saying, when you look at historical risk management for many organizations or corporations as well, they used to treat risk management as a separate department that works in silo on its own, where it's just given information and then it prepares that information and gives feedback as well, right? But now we're basically saying that a more comprehensive risk management is where the risk management function is basically working hand in hand with the other functions or departments of the organization. So which means the risk management department needs to work hand in hand with the finance department, needs to work hand in hand with the marketing department, the sales department, the manufacturing department, and all other departments of the organization. Why? Because in all these endeavors that the organization is going to be doing, especially all these functions within the organization, there is always an element of risk. And because there's always an element of risk, it basically means that in all these functions that you're seeing there, because there's an element of risk, it means that we need to make sure that the risk management function is also integrated in all those activities. Why are we so concerned about that? We are going to learn why we're concerned about that when we go through study unit 1. Because you will see that when we go through study unit 1, we are saying the main function of a risk management of a risk manager is basically to identify the risk. Now, after they identify the risk, they quantify the risk, and then they analyze the risk and then present the risk to the board and top management. Then the top management of the organization and the board are the ones who are going to make a decision to say, based on our risk-return relationship, because remember, there's always a link between the return that you want to generate and the risk that you're exposing yourself to. Generally, we say the more risk you take, the more expected return that you're pursuing. Remember, I said expected return, not actual return. So which means, depending on the risk appetite of the board and top management, that's when they are going to decide to say, so based on this risk exposures that were given, this is how much of the overall risk exposure, this is how much our risk limits should be. So we need to set the risk limit so that all the functions within the organization are going to be operating within those set risk limits. And then after the top management and the board now decide to say, this is how we are going to set as our risk exposure. So this is how much risk we're prepared to be exposing ourselves to, depending on their risk, on the risk appetite of the organization as well. That's when now the risk manager now has to go back and make sure that in all the activities of the organization, whether it's marketing, whatever activity that the organization is going to be pursuing as well, it has to be within the set risk limits. And when you look at lessons not learned there, you will see that based on this outline of these functions that I've given you now, you will see that in one way or the other, there was something that was done, which there was a function within the risk management function that was actually not done properly. Whether it's making sure that everybody understands the set risk limits, or whether it's ensuring that there's ongoing monitoring and reviewing of the risk exposures of the organization. If you look at all these case studies that they give us, there's always an element where you see that there's an element where the risk management function basically failed. But now, in Start Unit 1.5, we are now going to say, so we cannot say every time there is a large loss that the organization suffers, we are quick to blame the risk management function. Because you can have a properly working risk management function, but depending on your risk exposures, you might end up what? Suffering large losses as well, depending on your risk exposures. So which means just because an organization has suffered large losses does not necessarily mean that we automatically blame the risk management function of the organization. So now, when do we say, or when can we comfortably say, here, after we've identified 1, 2, 3, 4, we can say the risk management function has failed. And that's what we're going to be looking at as well. So if you check in Start Unit 1, they give us lessons not learned. And if you check under this section, the lecturer says, the aim of this study unit is to provide an overview of events that led to the demise of a number of enterprises. So we need to look at and learn about the events that led to the demise of a number of these enterprises as well. Then, of importance, we need to compare the roles and responsibilities of risk management and top executive management to say, so within an organization, what are the roles and responsibilities of the risk management function? And what are the roles and responsibilities of the top executive management as well? And we're going to look at that in detail as well. So here, under learning material, the lecturer says, managing a large organization is complex and requires the management of the organization to be aware of all the risks that the organization may face. Management is quite often bombarded with a whole basket of risks, as risks very seldom manifest in isolation. So a solution to one problem can also easily create new problems and may make it even more difficult to resolve the situation. And we are going to look at these type of problems as well in study unit 2.1. So we're going to look at these type of problems in study unit 2.1 as well. Then they say the different problems that an organization may experience are best illustrated with reference to examples of instances of where management was up to the task of managing the crisis or was experiencing severe stress in an effort to recover the business. Refer to the following discussions on prominent failures or organizations that are currently experiencing problems. So, typically, when it comes to study unit 1.1 to unit 1.5, unit 1.1 to unit 1.5, the main theme of this section is risk management failures. So we are trying to address the question, what are risk management failures and how do we identify risk management failures? So the question is, what are the risk management failures and how do we identify risk management failures? Now, when it comes to the exam, they are not going to ask you, if you check on unit 1.1, unit 1.1 looks at suspending the principles of financial management and governance, transforming energy the Eskom way. So unit 1.1 used to be very, very long, and the lecturer decided to stream it down where you are looking at a direct analysis of Eskom as well. That's unit 1.1. Unit 1.2 looks at, we have a table arbitrager, leave him alone, he is making us money. And this is where we look at the case study of Barings Bank, right? So when you look at the case study of Barings Bank, this is basically where we have a case study where we analyze a rogue trader, right? Then we have unit 1.3, where you look at HRH, where gross deception of the investing public through highly shonky technical accounting. So this is where the management of the organization was transgressing the accounting principles just to make it seem as if the organization was doing well, when in actual fact it was not doing well. And there was a bit of fraud involved in this as well. As you can see, as a common theme that you also find when it comes to some of these case studies, where there is usually an issue of fraud and misrepresentation. The unit 1.4 looks at Form A, the case study in 2004, the planes that would not fly. So this is where there was, in the US, they usually have snow, and sometimes when there's too much snow, it means that they are not able to de-ice the runway. And if they're not able to do that, it means that the planes are not able to land, and the planes are also not able to take off as well, which means that they now need to make sure that their system is up to date and able and have the capacity to reschedule the flights. And when this happened in 2004 for ComAir, as they were moving from one system to another system as well, there was this resulted in the system crashing. Reason being, the system had reached its limits on exactly how many bookings it can take when it comes to the bookings and also rescheduled flights as well. So we are going to look at that in unit 1.4. Please note, the way that the lecturer asks questions relating to unit 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. Please make sure that where you are sitting, you have a good network connection. So please make sure that where you are sitting, you have a good network connection, so that you are not going to be having any issues regarding being able to hear what I'm saying as well. So please make sure that you have a good network connection where you are sitting. So when it comes to how the lecturer asks questions from Unit 1.1 to Unit 1.5, typically this is how the lecturer would bring the question in the exam. So how the lecturer typically gives the question in the exam, as you can see here, in the May, June 2024 exam, they gave us a case study of Matola Foods Limited. So they gave us a case study, and then based on this case study, they now go on to say, as the risk manager, you are tasked to calculate the cost of risk. Sorry. We need to look at oh yeah. They give us that case study. So you see that, remember they give us that case study of Matola Foods Limited. Now, after they give us this case study of Matola Foods Limited, you see that the questions related to this case study, they'll ask question 2.1. They say, as the risk manager of Matola Foods Limited, discuss the type of risk management failures. So you need to understand that in Unit 1.5, we are going to go through in depth when it comes to the risk management failures. So we're going to look at the risk management failures, the 5 risk management failures. So which means now you now need to look at the 5 risk management failures and identify exactly how they are relevant to the case study that they give you. Then for Unit 1.2, for question 2.2b, they also say Matola Foods Limited faced substantial challenges due to inadequate risk assessment and mitigation strategies, which resulted in severe consequences. So as the risk manager, you are tasked to discuss the different type of risks that Matola Foods Limited overlooked. So we're going to also look at the different types of risks, and these different types of risks, they are also mentioned in detail when we look at Study Unit 11 as well. So as you can see, how we expect the lecturer to bring you these questions in the exam. It's not that they're going to say, based on the article of ESCOM that you've gone through, can you discuss the risk management failures based on the article of ESCOM that you've gone through? They're not going to, the lecturer does not ask you questions that way. If they're going to be asking you questions coming from between Unit 1.1 to Unit 1.5, where we talk about risk management failures, because that's the core concept that we need to look at when it comes to that section. When it comes to risk management failures, they have to give you the case study in the exam. They have to give you the case study. Then after they give you the case study, then they ask you questions based on the case study so that you answer regarding risk management failures based on the case study that they would have given you. So because of this, you will see that Unit 1.1, when it comes to Unit 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, please go through these study units as homework. I'm not going to go through these study units with you because my focus is more on how do I prepare you for the exam. My focus is more on how do I prepare you for the exam so that you're able to answer the questions in the exam if any question comes up from that particular section. So because of this, on your own, please go through these articles for Unit 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, so that you have a general understanding of exactly the risk management failures. But remember, for you to identify the risk management failures, you need to have gone through Unit 1.5. So for you to know exactly how do we identify the risk management failures, you need to have gone through Unit 1.5. So I'm going to go through unit 1.5 with you. Because once you go through unit 1.5, any question that is coming from unit 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, they are all going to be covered in unit 1.5, because in unit 1.5, they use another case study to actually analyze risk management failures as well. So I'm going to go through unit 1.5 with you so that you can see exactly, so how do we identify risk management failures? And for unit 1.5, they refer us to the case study on LTCM. So unit 1.5, we look at risk management failures. What are they and when do they happen? So which means for us to say, yes, this was the risk management failure, we need to be able to identify the cases or the points that needs to be ticked for us to say, based on this, we have seen that based on what we've identified here, this we can comfortably say this was a risk management failure. As I said, just because an organization suffered large losses does not necessarily mean that the first thing that we're going to blame on is risk management. So how do we now identify to say, based on the losses that have been suffered here, these losses are due to a risk management failure? So the article that we need to go through is risk management failures. What are they and when do they happen? So that's the article that we need to go through. Now, when we go through this article, under self-assessment, when we go through this article, under self-assessment, which is basically the learning outcomes that we need to make sure that we take note of from this particular section, they say, argue the case that LTCM demise was caused by a risk management failure. Compare the roles and responsibilities of risk management and top executive management. Discuss the types of risk management failures and discuss the alternatives that enterprises can consider to prepare for future crises as well. So these are the learning outcomes that we need to make sure that we take note of as we go through the article. So when you look at the article for unit 1.5, the article is the heading of the article is risk management failures. What are they and when do they happen? So in introducing us to this particular case study, remember, please note, the case study, knowing exactly what happened with LTCM, it's not of much importance to us. Yes, from identifying risk management failure, yes, we can take note of that. But for Rsk4803, knowing exactly what happened with LTCM is not of much importance to us, because the most important thing that we need to be able to identify or take note of from this section, the most important thing that we need to take note of there is this section here. And here, this is where they discuss, as this discussion suggests, then there are 5 types of risk management failures. So in this article, they are addressing us and showing us exactly how to identify risk management failures. And they are saying there are 5 types of risk management failures. And they are using this article to demonstrate identification of these 5 risk management failures. And remember, I said going into the exam, they will give you a different case study. And based on that case study, they will now ask you to identify and discuss the 5 types of risk management failures pertaining to that case study. So, all in all, in everything that we're going to do in studying to 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5, the main thing that we need to take note of from there is this. The rest of the things, keep them at the back of your mind, but the most important thing is these 5 types of risk management failures. You should be able to identify these 5 types of risk management failures. So before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a rundown of these 5 types of risk management failures. Then we'll go back to the start of the study unit so that you, based on what you've already identified as the 5 types of risk management failures, how do we now see them being relevant pertaining to what has been discussed here? So here they say, as this discussion suggests, then there are 5 types of risk management failures. The first one being failure to use appropriate risk metrics. And further down to this, they are going to discuss that and also relate it to LTCM. Mismeasurement of known risks is the second one. And the third one is failure to take known risks into account. And the fourth one is failure in communicating risks to top management. And then the fifth risk management failure is failure in monitoring and managing risk. So these are the 5 types of risk management failures. Now, going back to the beginning of the article, they say, now remember we said this article is based on LTCM, right? And yet they say, in media accounts and popular commentaries on the current financial crisis, and remember here, a constant refrain is that the risk management function in many of the world's largest financial institutions has failed to carry out its responsibilities. Please note that this article was prepared during the time when we were having the 2007-2008 financial crisis. So please keep that in mind. So when they talk about the current financial crisis in this case, they are referring to the 2007-2008 financial crisis, which emanated from the US, having a ripple effect across the world as well. So here they say, to cite just one example, an article in the Financial Times declares it is obvious that there has been a massive failure in risk management across most of Wall Street. In this article, I want to challenge or at least qualify this assertion by examining what it means for risk management to fail. My main aim in these pages is to show that the fact that an institution suffers an extremely large loss, that if an institution suffers an extremely large loss, does not necessarily imply that risk management failed or that the institution made a mistake. In making my case, I will not spend much time on the current crisis, but instead begin with the collapse of LTCM. And LTCM in this case is what? Long-term capital management in 1998. And here they say, the most troubling top executives and investors could continue to expect more from risk management that it can deliver. With this goal in mind, I show when bad outcomes can be blamed on risk management and when they cannot. And in so doing, I offer what amounts to a taxonomy of risk management failures. I also address the question of whether and how risk management failures can be used to improve the practice of risk management. I conclude that the probabilities of large losses are measured very imprecisely, and that as a consequence, companies should rely less on estimates of such probabilities and pay more attention to the implication of large losses for their survival. Among other suggestions, I propose that greater use of scenario planning could allow institutions to do a better job of anticipating the likely consequence of low probability outcomes and developing effective responses to them. So here, we are going to look at this. When it comes to scenario planning, we are going to look at it in more detail as well when we look at study unit 2, as well as when we look at study unit 9 as well. We're going to look at more in detail when it comes to scenario planning. Now, what the author is trying to explain in this case is that just because an event has a low probability of materializing does not necessarily mean that we are now going to just overlook it and say it's immaterial. So just because an event has a low probability of materializing does not necessarily mean that we're going to overlook it as immaterial, because even though it is a low probability of materializing, the most important thing is if it does materialize, what are the implications on the going concern of the organization? How is it going to affect the going concern of the organization? And this is what they are trying to demonstrate now when they look at the case study of LTCM. So here they say, was the collapse of LTCM a risk management failure? So here they say, we now know a good deal about the rise and fall of LTCM. In 1994, ex-Salomon Brothers traders and two future Nobel Prize winners started a hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Fund. LTCM was the company that managed the fund. The fund performed superbly for most of its life, with investors earning 20% for 10 months in 1994, 43% in 1995, 41% in 1996, and 17% in 1997. And if you look at it from an investment perspective, these were very good returns. It's very, very difficult to find a fund that can give you a return of about 41% in 1 year. It's very, very difficult to find such funds. And also finding funds that give you consistently good returns over a long period of time is very, very difficult as well. So here they say, but 1998 turned out very differently. In August and September of 1998, following the default of Russia on its ruble-denominated debt, world capital markets were in crisis, and LTCM lost most of its capital. Before its collapse, LTCM had capital close to 5 billion, assets exceeding 100 billion, and derivatives with a notional amount in excess of 1 trillion. By mid-September, LTCM capital had fallen by more than 3.5 billion, and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York coordinated a rescue by private financial institutions that injected 3.65 billion into the fund. So, does a loss of more than 70% of capital and a rescue by banks involving an injection of 3.65 billion of new capital necessarily represent a failure of risk management? It turns out that this is not an easy question to answer. To define a risk management failure, one first must have a clear understanding of the role and limitations of risk management. In a typical company, the role of risk management is to identify and evaluate the risks faced by the firm, to communicate these risks to senior management and possibly the board of directors, and to monitor and manage those risks in a way that ensures the firm bears only the risks its management and board want exposure to. So, do you see the roles and responsibility of the risk management function? Please take note of this. This is a very common question in assignments and a very common question in past question papers. And if they bring this question, usually the lecturer has to bring this question in question number 1. Because remember, question number 1 is typically made up of maybe 21 to 30 questions which are multiple choice questions. And these questions, yes, it's multiple choice, but because the answers are very much related to each other, maybe some answers are wrong by changing of one word, which makes the whole answer wrong as well. Because of this, you need to fully understand the roles and responsibilities of risk management. So remember here, they say they need to identify and evaluate and then communicate the risk to senior management, also the board as well, right? And then afterwards, they need to, so which means, what this means is that the risk manager does not make decisions on exactly how much risk exposure to take. That's the job and responsibility of the top management and the board, because those are the ones who are going to make a decision to say, so based on the organization and based on our risk appetite, how much risk exposure do we need to expose ourselves? Because remember, they are also trying to balance between risk and return. Because remember, every company wants to pursue and maximize the returns as much as possible, depending on if they on the risk that they can also take as well. Then also, which means they need to make sure that they identify and evaluate, and then they need to communicate to the top management and the board. And then the board is the one that's going to make a decision on exactly how much risk exposure to take. Then afterwards, they need to monitor and manage those risks in a way that ensures that the firm bears only the risk that its management and board want exposure to. Very, very important statement. Very, very common question in assignments and question papers as well. Please take note of this statement, because you will see that as we go through the different study units that we're going to be going through there as well, this statement is always going to be coming back to be relevant. When we go through study unit 1.6, it's going to be relevant. When we're going to look at enterprise risk management in study unit 2, this is also going to be very relevant as well. And even as we go through the other study units, which are also linked, because remember, these are basically the foundation of risk financing, which means as we go through other study units as well, this understanding of the roles and responsibilities of the risk management function and also of the top executive function, you need to understand exactly what are their roles and responsibilities. Very, very important statement. Now, they also go on to say, to guide them in monitoring and managing risks, most companies specify one or more measures of overall risks, perhaps along with other metrics and indicators. When a risk measure exceeds the company's stated risk tolerance of risk, the stated tolerance of risk is reduced. But when the risk measure falls below the firm's targeted risk position, the firm will likely choose to increase that risk. Because remember, they are always trying to monitor the risk, because if you take with the understanding that there's always going to be a linear relationship between risk and expected return. As we pursue higher expected return, we also expect that our risk levels are also going to be higher as well. So here they say, so are there any questions so far? on what we've covered? Any questions? Any questions so far?
Morning, Granos. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Um,
I can hear you clearly.
oh, great. Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to check something. We have a risk management executive, which they are a strategic role that you like your CRO. That thing, as things stands now, we have companies that have got some of the CRO sitting on boards, being there to be able to guide the strategic direction of the business so that they may be able to take risks that they fully can comprehend. So in the context of this and when it was written, because this subject is evolving, it is then fair to assume that the risk management function in the context of what we're learning today will be something in the bit in between operation and executive management, meaning the risk function in this context will be a role that will identify the risk in the operations of the business, or in finance or in ICT, and then communicate those risks to the board, and the board will then take over in terms of determining whether this is within the risk appetite and accordingly make a decision. And then in this case, in an event where the communication to the board happens, however, because we have arguments in the past that says risk management was at some stage treated as a tick box exercise. So
Mhm.
if the risk management function has done their part in ensuring that this message to the nature and extent of the risk is communicated to the board, however, the board does not, maybe driven by ambition or any other thing. So is that why we limit the risk management function within this to say we do not necessarily move further to a situation where we find them in board sitting there, an executive, because in the now context, they no longer are not considered part of the board. They are some participating in the board of directors. There's your risk committees and stuff like that.
Correct. I think the most important thing that the author is trying to emphasize there is that when you look at the risk management function, right? The even if your chief risk officer is going to be sitting as part of the board, right? As long as they are not going to be making that decision on their own, as long as it's going to be a board decision and not necessarily a chief risk officer decision to say how much risk are we taking. I think that's what the author is trying to emphasize on, that the main responsibility is not necessarily going to be resting on the chief risk officer, but it's going to be sitting with what? With the board. Because remember, the board, as long as even if they are the ones who are going to be presenting the risk to the board as well, yes, they can contribute in making the decision. But remember, as long as the chief risk officer is not going to be the one solely making the decision, as long as the decision is going to be stamped by the board, then this is what the author is trying to emphasize, that the board and the top management are the ones who have to make the decision at the end of the day. Are we together then?
No, I follow. Thank you.
All right, all right. So which means, like what you said, yes, previously, people would be having like what you call that, where they say it becomes a tick box exercise where they'll just be given a risk sheet where they say, like, for example, you go to a site, they just tick the sheets just to make sure that we are done with this, but not necessarily. So which means we understand that we want risk management to move away from being a tick box exercise where you are just making sure that whatever is given on the list is exactly what you're going to make sure that you tick, you're done with the risk management function, and you continue with your exercise, which means that in a way, it means that risk management function is being treated in silo. But remember, the moment we say we now look at risk management as an ongoing activity where there's monitoring and reviewing and managing, making sure that you monitoring and managing the risk as well. It basically means that it's no longer a tick box exercise, because on an ongoing basis, as the project is going, there's also going to be a need for the risk manager to make sure that they are also ensuring that any activities that are also going to be ongoing are going to be following within the risk limits that has been set by the board and top management as well. So that's the most important thing that they're trying to emphasize here. Are there any other question? Any other question? All right. So on the next paragraph, they say, given this definition of the role of risk management, the actual returns of LTCM tell us little about whether its risk management failed. To understand why, it is helpful to consider a very simple hypothetical example. Suppose that you stood in the shoes of the managers of LTCM in January 1998 and had the opportunity to invest in trades that, viewed as a portfolio, had a 99% chance of producing a return for the fund before fees of 25% over the coming year and a 1% chance of a loss of 70%. So the expected return on the fund would be estimated as 24.05%. Remember, your expected return is given as your expected return is given as the sum of your returns for the individual asset multiplied by is it probability of weight in this case? Multiplied by the probability of that return. So it's the sum of the expected return is given as the sum of the return for the given scenario multiplied by the probability of earning that return for that given scenario as well. So which means in this case, they're telling us that the first scenario is that there's a 99% probability that the return is going to be 25%. So the return is 25% multiplied by the probability of earning that return, which is 0.99, plus, because you're summing up, the second scenario is a return where we can suffer a loss of 70%, and the probability of that happening is 1%, which is 0.01. So they are telling us that based on this, it means that our expected return in this case would be given as 24.05%. So in this case, our expected return would be given as 24.05%. Please note, we're going to look at this in more detail in study unit 7 and also in more practical detail in study unit 11 as well. We're just using this for demonstrative purposes. So this is how ideally one would get the expected return. So they're basically saying that when they were assessing their returns and their probability of earning that returns, they started off the year expecting a return that on average, we expect a return of 24.05 to be generated by this particular portfolio. But what do we see here? A good positive return is a 99% chance of happening, but a very bad return of losing 70% is only 1% chance of happening. So remember they said the issue here is that we find that in some cases, the management sometimes tends to overlook the effect and the potential impact of a very bad return, which has a very low probability of happening. So which means this bad return now of 70% of us losing 70% of the portfolio value, how is it going to end up affecting the what? The going concern of our organization. This is where the question becomes now. So is there any question regarding this calculation before we go on? Any question? So based on this, they say such an expected return would, of course, have been very attractive for a hedge fund or any investor again, provided that the assigned probabilities and other underlying assumptions were reasonably consistent with the economic reality. Though hypothetical, these numbers are roughly consistent with the actual returns of LTCM before 1998 and the expectations. LTCM was holding out to its investors at the time. For one thing, in its two best years, the hedge fund earned more than 50% before fees, so that a return of 25% does not sound implausible. And second, LTCM told its investors to expect losses in excess of 20% in 1 year out of 50, which again is roughly comparable to an expected loss of 70% in 1 year out of 100 years. So which means they are saying we are expecting that in 1 year, when you look at this probability there of 1%, so we are saying if you look at it from a year's perspective, we are saying in 1 year out of 100 years, we're expecting that in 1 year out of 100 years, we can suffer a loss of 70% of the value of the portfolio in 1 year out of the 100 years. So if you look at it from that perspective, the question now becomes, when is this 1 year going to come forth? Is it going to come forth this year? Is it going to come forth next year? After 10 years, after 20 years, or in the 100th year? That's where so which means what is uncertain there is the timing of when this loss would happen. So based on this, they say, as stated earlier, then the main responsibility of risk management is to assess the firm's risks and then communicate that assessment to top management. And the final decision to take known risks rests not with the risk manager, but with top management. This decision depends on the risk appetite or tolerance of an institution, and defining that appetite is one of the most important responsibilities of management and the board. So it is at the heart of the firm's strategy and how it creates value for its shareholders. When determining the risk appetite of an organization, the general approach is to weigh the benefits of increased risk-taking against the costs, and to aim for the point where the marginal benefits equal the marginal cost. So in this case, LTCM, it could be argued that the cost of the organization from losing 3.5 billion for its investors was limited to just those losses. That is, there was an additional cost beyond the that there were no additional costs beyond the direct monetary loss. For many companies and financial institutions, however, large losses can have significant deadweight loss, so which deadweight costs. So which means apart from the loss that you're suffering as an organization, there are other losses that are going to be coming in, which are also coming in as complementary to that particular loss as well. So that's basically what they refer to as deadweight cost. And yet they say, for example, after a large loss, a financial institution may be forced to scale back its investments and sell assets in unfavorable markets, face increased scrutiny from regulators, and lose valuable employees and customers concerned about the institution's staying power. In any institution, management and the board must take account of such deadweight costs when making decisions that create the risk of large losses. And this is why many organizations are at pain to ensure that they maintain confidence within their organization in doing business as well. Here's a practical example. If you look at what is happening when you look at the war between Iran and US and Israel as well. Remember, as the war materialized there, as the counter way of countering the US as well. Remember, Iran started bombarding the US assets that were being that were being hosted by the neighboring countries as well. And one of them is where you look at if you look at the case of Dubai, they had positioned themselves as a world destination for those people who want to go on holiday and so forth and so forth as well. And because of this, you see that they are now starting to complain that there is a cost to this war, that they can see that there is assets that they've already lost, but over and above this as well, there's a deadweight cost that they're also worried about. That's why they are trying as much as possible to maintain confidence by trying as much as possible to ensure that they cater for the hotel stay for the guests who are not able to travel. They protect the guests, or even accompanying the guests with fighter jets who are flying out of Dubai as well. All those things are basically trying to mitigate the deadweight cost that comes with what? With the actual monetary cost that you can see when it comes to loss of assets as well, because they want to maintain the confidence within a particular system. So the same principle basically works here when you look at what? The deadweight cost as well. So here they say, so again, it is top management's job to determine a company's risk appetite. And taking that appetite as a given, risk managers can help assess the expected profitability of the proposed investment by evaluating how much capital is required to support it. Also, worth noting, an investment that is not value adding for a given level of risk could become so if the firm's risk appetite increases, because less capital is then required to support it. But now, so when you now look at the relationship between risk and capital, remember we said, when you look at the accounting equation, your assets is equal to equity plus liabilities, right? And so when you look at now your assets, the aim with your assets is to generate the returns, right? And here, the risk that we're talking about there is the risk of a loss. So which means we are saying that in case of a loss, do we have enough capital available to absorb these losses? Because remember, if we don't have enough capital available to absorb these losses, what is going to happen? The organization is not going to be able to continue as a going concern, isn't it? We have seen this quite a lot when it comes to banks. It's very much clear when it comes to banks as well. Like, for example, the case of VBS Bank, where because of the large losses that the bank suffered as well, and they didn't have enough capital, what happened? There was a run for the bank where depositors wanted their money as well. And if the depositors wanted their money there, the bank was not able to continue as a going concern as well. So the going concern of the bank is by ensuring that whatever loss that we have here, we have enough capital to absorb these losses. If we don't have enough capital to absorb these losses, what is going to happen? The organization, whether it's a financial institution or a non-financial institution, is not going to be able to continue as a going concern. Are we on the same page? Any questions? So, in that case, but whether taking large risks is worthwhile for an institution ultimately depends on its strategy, which in turn depends heavily on its risk appetite. And we're going to look at risk appetite in detail in study unit 9. So when we go through the study unit 9, when we look at the RIMS report, this is where we're going to look at risk appetite in more detail as well. And yet they say, and risk managers are already and risk managers, as already suggested, do not set either both the strategy and risk appetite are the prerogatives of top management. So to illustrate this point, suppose that a company follows the common practice of setting its risk tolerance by choosing a targeted credit rating. Once the target rating is chosen, there is a multiple combination of risks and capital that can be expected to achieve the target rating. For a given choice of leverage, the firm does not have much flexibility on choosing its risk level if it wants to achieve its target rating. If faced with a promising investment opportunities that would increase risk, the firm has two main choices. It can choose to reduce the leverage and the financial risk while taking on more business risk to keep its rating, or it can maintain its leverage and accept lower credit rating. Remember, when we look about leverage, we're looking at the use of debt. So the use of debt financing, which is your liabilities there. So the use of your liabilities or debt in financing the organization, that's basically what we refer to as leverage. So here they say, and there's also, of course, a third choice. Maintain both the credit rating and existing leverage, but at the cost of passing up the investment opportunity. So at the end of 1997, LTCM had capital of 9.4 billion, but decided to return 36% of the capital to its investors. With less capital, LTCM could still execute the same trades, but to fund them, it had to borrow more and hence increase its leverage. By increasing its leverage, it could boost the return to its shareholders if things went well, but only by raising the expected losses of things, if things went poorly. So which means the use of debt is not a bad thing. Remember, leverage basically means that you're using debt. So which means we're saying in financing the assets of the business, it's either we ask the owners of the business to contribute through ordinary share capital, or we ask external parties to contribute through debt, like for example, issuing bonds or getting loans as well. Now, having debt within an organization is not necessarily a bad thing because you're using other people's money to make money. But what you have to take note there is that debt comes with two very important things. Whether you make money or not, you still need to pay interest on that debt. And whether you make money or not, you still need to repay that debt when it falls due. So having debt, it's like a double-edged sword where it can work to your advantage or it can also cut you as well. So which means now, when you look at the case of LTCM, they were now becoming too leveraged because they were using more and more debt financing and even repaying some of the ordinary share capital. So that's a very, very difficult situation. Reason being, the more debt you utilize, it means that if anything happens and you're not able to generate enough profits, it means that you might not have enough profits available to pay your interest when it falls due. And you might not have enough reserves available to repay the principal amount when it falls due. And it means that you are now running the risk of what? Of default. And this is basically the situation that LTCM was finding itself. It was becoming way over leveraged. Now, with that in mind, this is basically what they were trying to what the author was trying to explain here. So the author goes on to say, at the end of 1997, LTCM had capital. Well, okay, we've gone through this. So was increasing leverage a bad risk management decision? In my example, I assume that the partners of LTCM knew the risks and the rewards from higher leverage. In the well-worn language of financial economics, increasing leverage appeared to be a positive net present value decision when it was made. But ex post, remember ex post, we're talking about after the event has happened. So after the event has happened, or after the fact, it proved to be a costly decision since it meant that when the assets fell in value, the value of the fund's equity fell much faster as well in response to that. So here they say, in sum, effective risk management does not provide a guarantee against failure. Even in companies with the best risk management people and systems, large losses can and will occur as long as taking the risk of large losses increases expected profits sufficiently for top management to be willing to take the risk. With good risk management, such losses will be attributable to an unlucky draw, to a 1 in 100 event. Ultimately, how likely such large losses will depend on choices made by those entrusted with determining the firm's risk appetite. So the job of risk management is to ensure that top management knows and understands the probabilities associated with the possible outcomes of the firm's strategy before they make the decision to commit the firm's capital. Very, very important statement there. I've seen this statement being asked as a true or false question, or as a question where they can ask you to complete this particular statement as well. Or they can say, they can ask you to complete this statement, or they say, is this statement true or false? Please take note of this statement. Very, very important statement. So that's basically a rundown of exactly what we saw happening when it comes to LTCM, right? So can we take a 10 minutes break until 9:50? Then at 9:50, we now look at risk management failures and see exactly how they relate to the case study of LTCM. So can take a 10 minutes break until 9:50, and then at 9:50, we continue with looking at now the core concepts that we have been looking at when it comes to unit 1.1 to 1.5, where we look at risk management failures to say, so given these case studies, how are we going to be able to say, yes, here risk management did indeed fail? So that's what we're going to be looking at after we take a short break. So we're going to be resuming at 9:50, and where we're going to be looking at the risk management failures as well. All right, can we continue? So now we are going to be looking at identifying the different types of risk management failures. And in the section where we look at the taxonomy on risk management failures, they say, as these discussions suggest, then there are 5 types of risk management failures. The first one being failure to use appropriate risk metrics, mismeasurement of known risk being the second one. The third one is failure to take known risks into account. And then the fourth one is failure in communicating risks to top management. And the fifth one is failure to monitor and managing risk. And now I discuss each of these failures in turn. And here they say risk metrics and risk management failures. And here they say the risk metric that is most closely associated with modern risk management is value at risk. Please note that for those who are doing market risk, which is Rsk4803, we're going to look at value at risk in a lot more in depth in calculating it and even interpreting it as well. So that's why we're going to look at it here. We're just going to be introduced to value at risk, but we're not going to go in depth when it comes to analyzing the calculations and so forth. So here they're saying the most commonly used measure of risk is value at risk. So here they say the daily value at risk measure is widely used in financial institutions for assessing the risk of trading activities. Though value at risk has proved to be an extremely useful risk measure, it is useful only as long as the question it answers is well understood. Value at risk is the largest loss the firm expects to incur at a given confidence level, which means that value at risk tells us nothing about the distribution of the losses that exceeds the value at risk. So when you look at failure to use the appropriate risk metrics, they're saying the value at risk tells us exactly what is the maximum loss that we're expecting to suffer over a given period of time, given a certain confidence level. So which means within a certain confidence level, whether it's a 90% confidence level or a 95% confidence level or a 99% confidence level, right? It means that the value at risk does not tell us exactly what is the distribution of those losses which are exceeding the value at risk. So which means, like for example, if you are dealing with it value at risk at 90%, right? The value at risk does not tell us or give us the distribution of those losses once they exceed the value at risk. Like for example, if you look at the distribution of the losses, we are saying for example, within a 90, let's say for example, if it's a 90% confidence level, right? Within a 90% confidence level, we're trying to look at the distribution where we are looking at 90% of the values. So we're looking at the distribution of the losses when we look at 90% of the values, for example, right? But what it doesn't tell us exactly what is happening is the distribution of those losses when they exceed the 90% level. Because some of these distribution tables, right, or this distribution, some of the distribution does not normally follow a normal distribution. It might have a situation where some of these losses might have a distribution like this. And if it has got an extra distribution like this as well, the value at risk does not tell us exactly what is the distribution of these losses that are exceeding the value at risk. So that's basically the weakness that we also find when it comes to the value at risk. And we are going to look at it in detail in market risk. That's why you see that in market risk, especially when you look at financial institutions, they even go further and look at the expected shortfall as well to try to explain the distribution of those losses which are exceeding the value at risk. So here they say this limitation of value at risk has nothing to do with how institutions estimate their value at risk. Rather, it is simply a matter of how the value at risk is defined. Value at risk is the estimate of the minimum worst loss expected as opposed to the expected worst loss. So here, when I talk about the expected worst loss, the expected worst loss is the average of the losses exceeding the worst loss. So it's the average of those losses which are exceeding the worst loss. And in actual fact, when you talk about the average of the losses exceeding the worst loss, that's why we talk about what the expected shortfall, although they don't go on and describe it here. So here they say, though appropriate for some purposes, value at risk is likely to be useless for others. So which means it's not all the time that you can use the value at risk as the risk metric. It can be appropriate for other risk exposures, but it's not going to be appropriate for what? For all risk exposures. So here they say, thus, though calculation of the daily market value at risk can be intellectually satisfying for risk managers, since it involves up-to-date quantitative techniques, an exclusive focus on it could lead risk managers to ignore critical dimensions of risks. So the daily market value at risk should generally not be the primary focus of top management, which must pay attention to longer run indicators and implications of risks. So as I show with an example below, short-run value at risk measures can continue to mislead management by suggesting low risk until a series of events produces huge losses and the firm fails as well. So the main thing there is that sometimes when we use the wrong risk metric, this is where we can attribute what? To having a risk management failure. So the first one is use of the wrong risk metric. And for example, using the value at risk when it's not appropriate for the risks exposure that we are encountering as well. Are we on the same page on the first one? The second one is mismeasurement of known risks. And here they say risk managers could make a mistake in assessing the probability of a large loss if they could be wrong about the size of the loss given that it takes place. Or they could use the wrong distribution altogether. Further, in the case of a financial institution with many positions, although the distribution associated with each position may be estimated properly, the correlation among the different positions may be mismeasured. So such correlations are extremely important in risk management because as correlation increases, so does the vulnerability of the portfolio to low probability events. So here, when they talk about mismeasurement of known risks, as an example, remember here, we said our expected return is calculated using this amount, right? And we got that the expected return is this amount. But remember, this is based on the assumption that the probability of a 70 million loss in 70 million loss in this case is 1%, and the probability of a 25 million gain in this case would be, as an example, is 99%. It means, as an example, what if we made a mistake in calculating these probabilities? So what if we made a mistake in calculating these probabilities? As an example, what if this probability, as an example, was actually, let's say, for example, was actually 40%, And what if this probability was actually 60%? So now we're saying, remember, we're looking at mismeasurement of what? Known risks, right? So what if we made a mistake in allocating these probabilities? Or we mismeasured the allocation of these probabilities? What is going to be the effect of the expected return? You will see that the expected return in this case would be given as, the expected return will be given as 25 multiplied by 0.4 plus minus 70 multiplied by 0.6. So if you do the calculation there, how much do you get? This would be 10. And this would be 42. So do you see that our expected return drastically changes from being a positive 24%, 0.05% return, which is positive, to a loss of minus 32%. So do you see the effects of mismeasurement of non-risk exposures? Like, for example, when we're calculating the expected return there, if we don't allocate if we make a mistake in allocating probabilities of suffering these losses, what is going to happen? An investment which would expect to give you a positive return might end up giving you a negative return. And remember, this ends up affecting what? The acceptability of the investment as well. So that's basically what they're trying to explain when it comes to mismeasurement of known risks. Yes? Is there a question?
Yeah. Thanks, Renus. Two things then. The first one, we spoke about value at risk as probably not, it may in some cases not be appropriate risk metric to be able to determine the value at risk in totality or maybe overall risk. And then I wanted to basically understand one thing. In this, because sometimes I would assume that the metrics we would use for measuring a particular risk, for instance, if I'm looking for trends and I have an appetite of maybe 5% losses, and anything that goes above there, let's say 5.1, will indicate an anomaly. And then out of it, maybe I can take a secondary step, which is part of risk management, maybe the monitoring part of things. Would then not be a debatable case to say this, unless there are specific matrices that are linked to a particular risk, saying if I'm managing this risk, the appropriate risk matrices to monitor the risk would be these ones. Would it not be debatable? That's one. Secondary to my second question is this one in terms of mismeasurement. Sector specific probabilities and calculations, normally there would be a data source that would indicate the analysis maybe of the market. Like we know that the investors, they have got think tanks where they get this information. What is the likelihood that we would use mismeasurement of matrices or of probabilities in this case? Is there something that we can give live examples to say we've had cases of this kind, and would then be something that will translate to a risk management failure, or probably a sector specific, or purely total incompetence of the risk managers responsible for risk management within that entity?
Remember, it all depends. I'll answer the second one, right? Remember, these probabilities are very much dependent on historical data, right? So it also depends on exactly how much historical data are you using as an example. If you use 1 year or 2 years data compared to using 15-year data, you will see that in some cases, the probabilities that you're going to end up allocating there might be very different as well. Like, for example, if you use 1 year data, you might find that using our 1 year data, because you're using the most recent event that has happened, you will see that the 1 year data is giving you this 99% probability of 25% return and only 1% probability of 70% return. But if you end up, if you use maybe more historical data, like maybe over 15 years or over 20 years as well, that's when probabilities might end up changing. So it could be due to the historical data that is being used. Because remember, it's not all the time that you're able to get 15-year data or 20-year data. Like, for example, if you are introducing something, like, for example, if you're going into a market, you don't necessarily have the data of exactly how your company has performed over that because you're going into that particular industry. And in some cases, that industry might be new in that economy that you're looking to operate, that even if you're now going to be using the market indexes or the market indices, they are only having data over maybe 2 years or 3 years instead of what? Longer term data as well. So that's where the issue might also arise, your sources of data for the second one. Are we on the same? Are we together on that one?
Yeah, I understand that. Just for clarity, then maybe let's say from the lecturer's point of view, would ask a question of saying maybe the company X deviated from using the industry average of maybe analysis of 5 years in terms of checking for the trends to determine the probability. And then instead of using 5, they've used 2, that would then be equivalent to mismeasurement, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we'll get that kind of clarity, like so that it's not left to assumptions.
In the case study, they will try as much as possible to make it a bit more clearer to you on exactly where the mismeasurement is coming from. In most cases, the case studies, they will try as much as possible to make it a lot more clearer so that you can clearly see exactly where the mismeasurement of the known risks is coming from or what is really where it's emanating from as well.
Okay, no, thank you.
The first question, it was relating to the risk metric, right?
Yes. The value at risk in particular, yeah.
Sorry?
The value at risk.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, my question was, because these matrices, they mean different things to different companies, to different people. And for argument's sake, just for this course, would it be, because in the absence of clarity, then this may be debatable in a sense that I would
Correct.
use, yeah.
Yeah, so you see that if you're going to be doing market risk, we are going to go and delve a bit more in depth regarding that. In this
Okay.
example, if they give you as a case study, they'll make it very clear to you. They'll even state it a lot more clearly on exactly where the use of the appropriate risk metric basically failed as well, resulted in a failure when it comes to using what? Failure to use the appropriate risk metric as well. They'll make it a lot more clear. Like, for example, you see, I don't want to go too much in depth when it comes to value at risk and how you can further analyze it, because we're going to be looking at it in market risk, where value at risk. So you see that when you look at the evolution of the base codes, I think we're going to be introduced them a bit in Rsk4803, but not too much. So you will see that when you look at the evolution of the base codes, you will see that as the base codes were evolving as well, they also started recommending financial institutions like banks to not only use the value at risk as a risk measure, because they realized that yes, if you use the risk value at risk as the risk measure, you should also be concerned with what is the distribution of these losses which might end up exceeding the value at risk. What is the behavior of these losses? And the behavior of these losses is explained using the expected shortfall, which we're going to be looking at in market risk as well. So just know that the use of failure to use the appropriate risk metric can also cause a risk management failure. Like, for example, the use of value at risk when it doesn't explain the distribution of the losses which are exceeding the value at risk. So in simple terms, stick to that, because I don't want to go too much in depth and start explaining a concept which they don't really go in depth, or they don't even mention at all when it comes to this particular study unit as well. But take note of that and know that it's not always going to be appropriate, because you have to worry about the distribution of your losses and see exactly how much of this distribution is being explained, the value at risk, and what is the behavior of those losses which are exceeding the value at risk as well. Now, they also mention the issue of correlation as well, which is a very, very important issue, because where correlation comes in, I'll just give you as a simple example. The volatility of a portfolio is given as the square root of. Please take note of this, but don't worry about the formula. There's something that I'm just going to explain there. Remember, volatility measures risk, right? Volatility is your standard deviation. So this is your standard deviation. Which measures risk, and your standard deviation is given as the weight of asset A squared multiplied by the standard deviation of asset A squared plus the weight of asset B squared multiplied by the standard deviation of asset B squared plus 2 multiplied by the weight of asset A multiplied by the weight of asset B multiplied by the correlation coefficient of asset A and B multiplied by the standard deviation of asset A multiplied by the standard deviation of asset B. I'm more interested in this issue of the correlation between the two assets, because it contributes towards what? Measuring the total risk of these two assets. Now, how we analyze the correlation coefficient? Your correlation coefficient varies between -1 and +1, right? Where we say when the correlation coefficient is at +1, we say the two assets are perfectly positively correlated. And when the correlation coefficient is at -1, we say they are perfectly negatively correlated. And when the correlation coefficient is 0, we say there is no linear correlation. Why we're interested in correlation coefficient is mainly because when you look at the behavior of two assets, right? Remember, the idea is you want your correlation coefficient to be closer to -1 as much as possible, because the closer your correlation of the two assets A and B is closer to -1, the more diversified your portfolio becomes. So diversification is achieved by having two assets which are having a correlation coefficient closer to -1 as much as possible. And the more you go towards -1, when the correlation goes towards -1, it means your standard deviation goes down. So to reduce your standard deviation, it means that the correlation coefficient here has to go down. And if the correlation coefficient goes down, the standard deviation goes down, which means your risk exposure also goes down. So which means I don't want to go too much in depth regarding this, because we're still going to explain it later on. So which means what you need to take note of there is that the correlation coefficient affects the total risk of your asset. And how do you measure the total risk of your portfolio of two assets? By looking at the standard deviation. And the more the correlation coefficient goes to -1, the lower the correlation coefficient, which also lowers the total risk of the portfolio. So that's basically what they mean there. So which means when you now look at the issue of mismeasurement of your known risk. So when you now look at the issue of mismeasurement of known risk as well, it basically means that if you don't apply an appropriate correlation coefficient there, what is going to happen? You are also going to mismeasure your risk. So not using the appropriate correlation coefficient means you're going to end up mismeasuring your risk. which means if you say, for example, your correlation coefficient is -1, when it's not -1, what are you doing? You are underestimating your risk exposure because your standard deviation is going to be too low. And if, for example, if you say your correlation coefficient is +1, when it's actually less than +1, what is happening? It means you're overstating your correlation coefficient, which means you're also overstating your what? Your risk exposure as well. So that's basically how it contributes towards what? Mismeasuring your known risks as well. Are we on the same page? All right. Now, going more in depth regarding this concept, so going more in depth regarding this mismeasurement of risk as well, they say they also look at the risk, the limit of risk measurement. And then they say to sum up, then statistical techniques are generally used to estimate the distribution of known risks. Such approaches work well when there is a lot of data and when it's reasonable to expect future returns to have the same distribution as past returns. For instance, suppose that a risk manager wants to estimate the volatility of the return of a liquid stock. She will have hundreds of data points to fit a model of the volatility of the stock, and in most cases, that model will perform reasonably well. But in other cases, historical data will be of little use, say, because risk has not manifested itself in the past. So this is where you can also look at what the limits of risk measurement as well, where you are basically end up mismeasuring what the risks as well. Then they also look at mismeasurement stemming from overlooked risks. And then they say, now let's turn to a different kind of measurement failure. Failure to take account of risks. In my taxonomy, such ignored risks can take two different forms that have different implications for a company. First, a company's risk manager may ignore a known risk, perhaps because of a mistaken assumption that it is immaterial or because of the difficulty of incorporating it in the risk models. And second is the case of risks that are truly unknown or at least completely unanticipated. Then we also look at ignored known risks. And then they say, let's now consider the case of risk management failure in which material risks are known to at least some people inside the firm, but not reflected in the firm's risk models. In a well-functioning, truly enterprise-wide risk management system, all major risks would be identified, monitored, and managed on a continuous basis. In practice, of course, many corporate risks tend to be managed in decentralized silos, which increase the possibility that non-material risks are excluded from the central risk modeling process. When this happens, risks that are not captured by the system are not adequately monitored. And given the tendency of unmonitored risk to expand within the organization, such risks can become material if they weren't before. So some firms prohibit trading of financial instruments unless they are properly modeled, but such a choice has costs since it is often extremely valuable for traders to be active at the beginning of a new market. However, if financial instruments are not included in the models, traders are tempted to build up positions in these instruments, creating the possibility of large losses. And as an example there, we see this as well when it comes to trading of currencies, like, for example, trading of Bitcoin. Then they also look at unknown risks, and then they say most unknown risks do not create risk management problems. Unknown risk may not matter simply because they have a very low probability. For example, there is some probability that the building will be hit by an asteroid, but such a risk does not affect managerial decisions. The unknown risks that matter for our purposes are those that, had top management been aware of them, would have resulted in different actions. In sum, part of the risk manager's job is to think hard about all major sources of uncertainty, perhaps using scenario planning as a methodical way of identifying and anticipating unknown risks. But having said that, some risks will inevitably remain unknown until they actually materialize. After all, how many corporate risk managers anticipated the events of 9/11? Remember, 9/11, they are referring to the bombing of the Twin Towers and the terrorist events in the US on September 11, 2001. And acknowledging this possibility of unknown and unknowable risks, such risk managers at some point must concede the limitations of their models and perhaps recommend that additional capital be set aside for this possibility as well. And this additional capital, that's why we see that trying to account for this additional capital is why we see the continuous evolution of the what? Basel Accords as well. Then we also look at communication failures. And here they say, risk management is not an activity undertaken by the risk manager for the benefit of risk managers, nor should it ever be viewed as an operation or profit center unto itself. Instead, it should be designed to help the firm maximizing the value by protecting its ability to make the optimal investment and operating decision. So this brings us to another important point. In everything that we do in risk financing, every question that you're going to be answering, you are also going to be answering the question regarding the goal of the firm. Remember, when you're doing your undergrad, you were always asked, what is the goal of the firm? The goal of the firm is to maximize shareholders' wealth. And how do we maximize shareholders' wealth? By maximizing their share price, which means in every decision that we're making, does it result in maximizing shareholders' wealth? So you see that's why when you talk about capital budgeting techniques, which we are going to look at later on in Study Unit 7, where we talk about capital net present value as well, it all goes back to maximizing shareholders' wealth. Because if you're able to maximize the value of the firm, it means you're also able to maximize what? Shareholders' wealth as well. So here they say, the role of risk management in such strategic decision making is to provide timely information to the board and top management that allows them to assess the consequences of retaining or laying off risks. But for managements and boards to understand such risks and their consequences for the firm's operations, risk managers must communicate effectively, which means they must make sure that the decision makers fully understand their risk positions and their risk exposures before they make that decision as well, to say how much risk are we going to end up taking. Then there's also failures in monitoring and managing risk. And here they say risk management is responsible for making sure that the firm takes the risk that it wants to take and not others. So as a result, risk managers must constantly monitor the risk that the firm is taking. Further, they have to hedge or otherwise manage known risk to meet the objectives of top management. When we discuss that problem, we've focused on it as an inventory issue, that is as a matter of identifying and measuring risk that is fairly stable. Such an approach is likely to be well suited to industrial companies where risks tend to change slowly, but it may have to be modified for financial firms where risks can change abruptly, even if the firm does not take new positions. So the problem arises when from the fact that financial firms have many derivatives positions and positions with embedded derivatives. So the risk properties of portfolios of derivatives can change very rapidly with no trading whatsoever. So this is because complex derivatives often have exposures to risk factors that are extremely sensitive to market conditions. So you also have to keep that in mind when you're now looking at your risk exposures as well. So let's say in large complex organizations, it is also possible for traders to take risks that remain hidden for a while. Such positions could be constructed with securities whose risks escape detection, at least for a time, by even the best designed risk management models and systems. How can this happen? All organizations are forced to make trade-offs, and risk management is no exception. A company risk management function could, at least in theory, be designed to know everything at all times. But if it were organized that way, the risk management function, besides being hugely costly, would likely stifle innovation and reduce the competitiveness of the firm. So in fast-moving markets, employees need flexibility. But as suggested, the same flexibility as suggested, that same flexibility makes it possible for unobserved pockets of risk to emerge. And when such risks manifest themselves, it is not clear that they represent a risk management failure. Although risk management could have ensured that these risks were not taken, the firm and its shareholders would have been worse off. And even ignoring its effects on flexibility and innovation, improvements in risk monitoring are expensive enough that at some point they cease to be cost effective. One final point here: the effectiveness of risk monitoring and control depends crucially on an institution's culture and incentives. If risk is everybody's business, it is harder for the major risks to be undetected and unmanaged. However, if employees' compensation is affected by risks, they will be more judicious in taking them. The best risk models in a firm with limited incentives are likely to be much less effective than a firm where the incentives of employees are better aligned with the risk-taking objectives of the firm. So on that point, or on that note, this is where we come to an end. Now, remember, we were discussing the 5 types of risk management failures. Failure to use appropriate risk metric, mismeasurement of known risks, failure to take known risks into account, failure to communicate risks to top management, and failure in monitoring and managing risk. And these are the 5 types of risk management failures. So which means in everything that we did so far, unit 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5. This is the most important section that we have covered on everything that we've covered so far today. Are there any questions? All right. So please make sure that you take note of this, that this is the most important section when it comes to what we've covered so far. Those 5 types of risk management failures, because you are going to be asked to identify these 5 types of risk management failures in relation to the case study that they'll give you, whether it's in the assignments or the exam as well. Was there a question?
Yes, but I think you just answered it. I wanted to find out if this is going to be asked in a theory form or there are calculations that you must apply.
Normally, when they ask this question in the exam, they'll ask you as a theory question. So normally when they ask you this question in the exam, they'll ask you as a theory question. It's either they'll ask you to state and discuss the 5 types of risk management failures, or they'll give you a case study and discuss the 5 types of risk management failures in relation to the case study, so that you're able to demonstrate your understanding of the application of the risk management failures regarding in the real world. So if they give you this question in the exam, most likely they'll give you a case study, and then from the case study, they'll ask you to discuss the 5 types of risk management failures as they relate to the case study as well. Is there another question? All right, let's end here today. First thing, please note that we're having a class on the 28th, and those who are on the trial package, you are able to attend that class for free. So I'll send and make sure that I share the links for you to be able to access the class. The second thing is those who are on the trial package, for you to benefit more from these classes that we're having as well, please make sure that you register your user account on the website. You tell me which modules you want to be linked for the trial package, so that I give you access to these modules, so that you can go through the videos in preparation for the next class. You can also access the articles, which are already highlighted with a bit of notes on them, in preparation for the next class that we're going to be doing as well. Because remember, in the next class, we're going to look at Unit 1.6, which is also a very important study unit when it comes to theory questions in question number 1. And then we're also going to move on to question Unit 2.1, where we look at we're also going to look at Unit 2.1. And in Unit 2.1, this is where we're going to be looking at wicked problems. Very, very important, because they are very much applicable to the environment that we're operating in now, where we're saying that in trying to solve one problem, there's no agreement on exactly what the problem is, and there's no agreement on exactly what the solution should be. So which means the solution to this problem is basically an ever-evolving solution as well, which means that it's going to be very subjective in coming up with a solution to those wicked problems as well. So those are very important, 2 important study units that are going to be looking at as well, because when you look at past question papers, the lecturer loves to ask questions regarding coming from those 2 sections as well. All right, so enjoy the rest of your weekend. Please note that if you are on the trial package, please communicate with me on WhatsApp so that I give you access, so that you're able to download the soft copies of the articles, and also being able to watch the videos of the previous years, so that you're able to prepare for the coming class as well. All right, enjoy your weekend.